first thing I want to do here is I want to add an extra joint right here to the body now that we have the body built. So if we select this top null, go up to character, convert, and convert to joint, we end up with a joint right here. And so let's just do this for each of these. Convert to joint, character, convert to joint, and character, convert to joint. Okay, we're getting a little chaotic here, so I'm going to middle mouse click on these nulls. I'm going to hold shift and middle mouse click on these, middle mouse click on these, middle mouse click on these, because we don't need these right now. So I'm going to right click and come down and add to new layer. Okay, and if I go into the layer, I'm going to put in nulls, and I am going to get those out of the object manager, and I'm also going to hide them so we can't see them. Okay, so let's get our nulls in here, and what I want to do is I'm going to select all of these by holding down shift clicking them. I'm going to the naming tool, and I just want to replace null 0, let's see, dot 0, because I want to replace this whole last part, and I want to replace that with root, and and let's do all caps just so it's obvious. Okay, so now I'm going to take this and let's put them in here, just between them for right now, because we still need to adjust these. Let's go into the top view where it'll be easier to see this. So let's take our front and go into coordinate, and let's move that out. Let's see, if we put snapping on, that may actually help us get these arranged there, right there. And they do kind of need to be exact. It's clicking to that point. You just want to get them all to click to that same point. And there we go. And then make sure that you turn the snapping off. So you're still not seeing that joint, and the reason is because we haven't made it the top of the hierarchy. So as soon as we start putting that in, the rest of the joints under that root joint that we just created, you start to see that these joints show up. And one more. Okay, so now we have an extra joint, and you'll see that it'll add a little more movement into the body. And so there's one other important thing we need to do, is we need to add in a set of joints for the body, just so that when we bind this, we get a more accurate binding for our tentacles as well. We're not going to really do much with this center thing, but like I said, it will give us a better bind. And we could even have added another joint, but you get the idea here. So we're going to go into lines for this, and I'm in the back view, which I'm going to go ahead and change that back to front, so that is the actual default. So what we want to do is come up and get our joint tool, and actually I want to make sure that nothing is selected over here, just to be safe. Okay, so if we get the joint tool, what I want to do is start at the bottom and then work our way up, and the bottom will be our root, so that we'll get the most movement up here. So if you hold down Control, and let's just click and just try to keep them along that line. And what I'm doing is I'm putting a joint at each edge loop, because that's where the most of our bend will come from. And then that. Okay, and let's just make sure that that is in center, and it is. And this is going to be, we'll just call this body underscore root. And actually, well, we can leave that null. And we're just going to bring this down into here. Okay, actually, you know what? I don't really want that. Let's get rid of that. And we're going to select all these, come back to the naming tool, and we're going to get rid of these. And we're just going to add that in as a prefix, and then underscore just so it doesn't jam up against the other words, and replace. And I don't know how we ended up with two of these, but that's all right. And then here we're just going to click that, right click, and delete without children. So, all right. And this will make it just a little easier when we're selecting all these joints for the binding. Okay, in the file that you downloaded from the tutorial, there should have been a, go into the downloads, and there should have been a visibility 0PR 14D or whatever that is. Anyway, this is a palette, and we're going to need this quite a bit. That's why I included it. So let's click out of that, and what we want to do is come down to click on Edit, come down to Preferences, and you want to open up this preference folder. And so this is 17, and you can see it's right here. So if you double click that folder just to open it, now I'm of course on a Mac, and so let's go back into and create a new window here, Command N, and come to the downloads, and all you need to do is take this and drag it into here. So I'm not going to because mine's already in there. And when you're done with that, you can just close that, and you can close that. And then what you want to do is come up to the window, and we're going to, let's see, customize, and we want to load. Where are you? There we go. So window, customize, and you want to load a palette. And so that's going to take you right to that folder we were just in, and there's our visibility 0PR. So let's open that, and we're going to pull this out, and you see it's a little set of buttons that are really going to help our next function here. So if you click this little symbol over here, and let's just dock it right in there, and then we'll have that. And so what this does is this is going to allow us to zero out position and rotation, and there's other things in here too, and of course you can use this for all kinds of stuff. In order to keep this in your interface, you will have to go up and go to Window, Customize, and Save as Startup Layout, or Save Layout As. And then it's going to ask you for a name, and you can put Startup User or just Startup, or whatever you want to name it. And then it will actually put User. I'm not going to do it because I already have a bunch of these saved. And as you may have noticed on the last part, I had it on my standard, which has a lot of extra bells and whistles, but I want the version, possibly stripped down the way yours might look. Okay, so anyway, we have this in here now, and so what we have to do is we need to clean up our joints a bit. So let's double click on the body joint, not double click, I'm sorry, middle mouse click, and you see all those joints are selected. What we have to do is come in under Character and use the Joint Align tool. And all you're going to have to do is hit Align, and that aligns the Z-axis down the chain. And we want to do that with each one of these. And let me show you what's happening so you can see. Right now, you can see that it's actually the Y-axis that's aligned down the joints, and that's really not correct. So what we want to do is come to the Joint Align tool. When I hit that and I go back to this, now you see all the Y-axis are up and all the z-axis are right down the joint chain, and that's what we want for each of these. So we're going to come in here, grab the joint align tool, going to hit align, and going to middle mouse click. Okay, make sure all the joints are selected. Go back to here, going to hit align, and our last one, middle mouse click on that very top joint to select them all. Align, and okay. And so let's just check. Those look good. We can actually hold down shift and middle mouse click all of these, and we'll see that all our y-axes are up and all our z's are down the joint line, and that's what we want. Okay, so a little more housekeeping here. The body, we'll go ahead and do that for that too. So what I want to do is I want to get all these joints when we're at 0 in the timeline. I want all these joints to have zeros. So with a middle mouse clicking on that center body joint, we're going to go down here to freeze transformations and freeze all. Now we've got all zeros there, and let's go to the next one. Middle mouse click that whole hierarchy, freeze all. Middle mouse click the next one, freeze all. Come here, and you can usually select all of these at once, but I'm going to go through each one separately just so we know that they're correct. So that one is good. All zeros there, all zeros there, all zeros there, and all zeros there. Okay. So we also want to set up a little bit of, not protection, but it will help to keep the rig clean as we work with it. So I'm going to come in here and middle mouse click this body root again, and with just position and rotation selected, put a keyframe, and we're only putting that at frame 0. I'm going to middle mouse click this hierarchy, put a point there, a keyframe there on 0. I'm going to come here, put a keyframe on 0. Now what that's doing, well, let's go ahead and finish this up so we don't forget any. And middle mouse click, did I middle mouse click that? Middle mouse click the last one and set a keyframe. So what that's doing is that's setting a keyframe for every joint, because each joint now is zeroed out, okay, and has a keyframe for that 0. So once we start moving these joints around, let's just, I'm going to middle mouse click that, and I'm going to move down the timeline, and if I start doing this, okay, and I go back to 0, it automatically, because we have that keyframe, repositions those exactly the way they were when we started. And that's going to be important for what we are going to start doing next. So I just want to give you an idea of what we're actually going for. And if I hit play, you can see that I've already put some animation into this first tentacle. And, that's looking pretty cool. And then if I turn on the subdivision surface, you can see the thing is pretty smooth. Okay, so that's what we're going for. And let's go back to our working file. Now I do want to do something, and we're going to be working on this front right tentacle. So if you click on that and right click and go to Cinema Tags, and go down to Protection. We want to limit I played around with this and it seems to work pretty well. I want to limit the rotation of this hierarchy of joints. And the reason we're only going to do it to this one, because this is where we're going to create all our animation, just on this first set of joints. But I want you to say, why don't you come down in the attributes tag, and on position we want none, on scale we want none, And on rotation, we want to limit. Now I want you just to unclick H and P, because we're not going to limit those. Those are going to be just like, they can do whatever. But for the minimum in B, let's put minus 80. And then for the max, we're going to put plus 80, just 80. So that hopefully will help. It seemed to in my test. It helped to keep these joints from rotating so much that it actually started twisting the geometry. So now with that tag selected, you want to right click on that and you're going to say copy tag to children, because we do need that on every joint. And as you can see, now they're added to each joint and they're all the same. Okay, so let's close it from here. Actually, we can close it from here. There's a couple ways of doing this. I'm going to show you one way, just so you know that it exists. It works okay, but not as great as what we're going to end up doing. So come over down to character tags and grab this IK chain. So the first thing we need to do before we can do anything with this is we have to find the end joint of that chain. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to grab this little arrow. I'm going to roll this open, pull this down, and if you just click on this joint, it'll throw it right in there. And then we should be good to roll. These settings can stay. But if you see there's a Dynamics tab, I mean right now, we do any, it's not going to do anything. But if we go into Dynamics and enable that, okay, and right now the forces upon it is gravity, so if we hit play, there you can see that the whole joint chain falls. So we're going to go back, and I want to turn that display off. And okay, so that doesn't do us much good. But I do want to go in there, get the dynamics, and I want to zero this out. So if we hit play now, nothing moves, and that's how it should be with that, because there's no forces acting upon this joint hierarchy. So let's add a force, and if you come up to simulate and come down to particles, these forces will actually affect the joint chain. So let's just put in turbulence, leave it at the defaults, and hit play, and nothing's happening. The reason is because you have two settings in this Dynamics tab for the forces. You can either set it to include, so you can, if you have numerous forces in here, you can pull in the ones that you only want to affect that joint chain, or you can set it to exclude. And immediately you see we've got movement over here. And that way, whatever you put into your object manager, whatever forces you put in there, will affect that joint chain. And we're going to leave it at that, because we're only going to work with this one joint chain. So now, and you can see what's going on. It's like crazy going on. So let's come back here, and we're going to have to dial these parameters way down. I'm going to dial that down to 1, 0, and 2, and that's a little better, okay? But if you come in close, there's almost a mechanical feel to the way these joints are jerking around. They're not, they look sort of smooth, but it's very fast, which is not a problem because we'll control that later. But I don't like the jerkiness of this. So that's why I'm choosing to do this a different way. So let's go back here. Let's delete that tag. Let's play through this. You see that little joint that had to finish out the dynamic simulation. And so now we're back, and we should be able to come in here, choose that joint hierarchy, and we have all zeros, and that's what we want. So for now, let's just get rid of the turbulence from the object manager. So what we're going to use is the IK-Spline tag. Now, this is really important what we do next, because when I was testing all this, I accidentally put the spline, the IK-Spline tag on that first joint, and that's just what we don't want, okay? because remember, this is going to be our steady joint, okay? We want our movement to start here, and we can move that manually later, but this is where we want it to start at our second joint. So it's important that the IK-Spline tag go on this second joint. Right-click on that second joint, come down to Character Tags, and grab the IK-Spline tag. And we've got some settings for that. In the, let's see here, in the tag itself, the tag tab, under Type, we want to put Relative. It seems to work best once these joints are bound. It doesn't seem to distort the geometry as much. And this is important too, the twist. I'm going to set that to World. And that seemed to work really well to keep these joints from just spinning and really getting distorted and twisting the geometry. So we got to do that. This tag requires an end joint, just like the regular IK tag. So let's, in the end, grab this arrow, and we're going to roll that open, drag this down, and all you do is click that, put it in there, close that back up. And so it also is asking for a spline, and that is what's going to drive our joints. And since we already have a hierarchy of nulls set up, let's go back into our layer manager and click this here to make these visible. Back into attributes. And if you see that our first joint, if we come here to our first joint, that's right there. But our second joint is where we want our dynamics to happen. And the nulls we created are starting from that. So they're the perfect place to start to make our spline for this tag. So let's go up. I'm going to deselect that. I'm going to go up to MoGraph and bring in a tracer object. I'm going to drag it down into the hierarchy under Octopus. And you can see that if we go into that, what we want to do is connect all objects and deselect vertices, even though there are none in the nulls. And then we have our trace link. Now, what I want to do is I need to drag all these nulls from the right front, this whole hierarchy. But as you see what happens, as soon as I click on that, the tracer object goes away. So let's lock it. Okay. Now middle mouse click those nulls, drag it in, and you can see we have all 35, 0 to 34. I'm going to unlock that, and now we have a spline created that corresponds to these joints. But you can see that the spline is in this box here, but the axis is over here, and we need to move that axis so it's right there. So I'm going to right click on the tracer. I'm going to do a current state to object because I can't move the axis on the tracer, and we want to use a spline here. So if we go into top mode, okay, and just so you can see the spline, I'm going to turn the octopus off, turn this on, and there's our spline. If I hit points, you can see it. So let's go back into this mode. I want to be able to move our axis, and I want it to snap. Make sure that vertex snap is on. And I'm going to grab this axis and bring it down, and it snaps right to there. I'm going to deselect this, come back in here, and now we have our spline. I'm going to turn this back on, and our end spline point is exactly where our second joint is. So that's all good. So let's go ahead and rename this to right front underscore spline. And if you remember, we need that spline in there. So let's just drag that in there. All right. And so if we hit play now, nothing's going to happen because we really don't have anything acting on this spline. It needs to be dynamic so that we can move it. And the spline is what's going to control our joints now. So let's go over here, and we're going to find our dynamics, spline dynamics under the hair tags. Pop that into the scene, and I do have some settings. So in the Properties tab, let's put in 10%. And then the gravity, under Forces, we want to 0 that. And as you remember on the other tag, let's set this to Exclude so that we don't have to drag the forces into this tag every time we add them. I'm going to deselect that. I'm going to come down here. I'm going to hit Save. So if I hit play, still nothing's going to happen because we zeroed out gravity and we have no forces. So let's go up to Simulate, come down to Particles, and we'll just try turbulence again. And let's hit play. Now it doesn't look like much is happening, but if you see, these joints are moving. And this is why I decided to go with the Spline IK, or the IK-Spline, is because the forces don't drive like when we put it in for the joints went crazy. That doesn't seem to affect the spline the same way. And we have a lot more latitude. So I'm going to put 50 in here. I'm going to drag this up to about 150. And then we're going to hit play. And now we've got movement. And you can see what's happening though. You see how this joint chain is really pulling away and stretching that. We really don't want that, okay? And the reason is because our spline, our front spline, is not anchored. So let's do that. Let's go back here. I'm going to turn the turbulence off. So let's go up here, grab a null. I'm going to drag it under this spline, okay? Because we want that right where our last spline point is. So if we hit 0 PR, that places it right where the spline is, and we're going to use this as our spline constraint. Okay. So go into our spline and right click and come down to hair tags, and we're going to have constraint. Put the constraint. So what we want to do is drag this into our object. That's the object we're going to constrain to. And then we want to come over to go into point mode, and we want to select that point. Now you can't see it, but we know it's right at that joint, and as soon as I went over it, I got an axis, so I know that it is selected. Come back to the constraint tag and just hit set. Okay, so get out of point mode, click away, and let's make sure that our Dynamics tab is on. Okay, and we're going to turn on turbulence, and now let's see what we've got. Okay, so now our hierarchy is being affected, okay, but it's not moving away from our main joint, and that's what we want. Okay, so let's go in and let's just play around with this just a little bit. Maybe make this 60, and okay, so we're getting some nice movement. All right, let's clean things up a little bit. Let's go back into our layer manager. We can hide those nulls again. And the last thing we want to do here before we start the fun part of animating is we want to bind all these joints to this geometry. So let's go in, and everything has to be selected. So I'm going to middle mouse click the body root. I'm going to hold shift, middle mouse click the front right, front left, right back, left back, and you can see that these are all being selected. And then I'm going to hold command and grab this last thing. And with everything selected, I'm going to go up to character, command, and bind. And so you're going to see two new tags, the skin tag and the weight tag. And so if I double click that and select this top geometry, you're going to see that all our joints are weighted to this octopus. So that's good. And what that means now is when we hit play, we're going to see geometry moving. And that's what we want. Okay.